Greetings and salutations, and thank you for being here on a Monday, even though Riffbot apparently decided not to show up for work. So we're gonna have to figure out why Riffbot's on strike and give in to his demands, because we're not about strike breaking here. Clearly, he's decided that his work situation is untenable, and he has chosen to protest that by not showing up at work here today. So, at management, we will have to do better. Figure out what it is that we are doing to disservice Riftbot so that he won't even show up for work. So, thank you everyone for being here. A pizza party, maybe that's all he needs, right? He doesn't need a raise or better working conditions or, to be treated as an equal. He just needs a pizza party, and then he wouldn't be so upset with my behavior. That's probably all it is. Just a pizza party. I'll keep that in mind if I want to be like a real employer and really condescend the shit out of Riffbot. That's how we'll do it. So I hope everyone is well. Hope everybody had a lovely Mother's Day yesterday, and said Happy Mother's Day to the mother figure in your life. Casual Friday. I don't know if Riffbot's getting a casual Friday. Oh, Lord Vale. Oh, thank you. You're far too kind. See, that worked. Riffbot didn't even screw that up. Apparently the alerts work. Just Riffbot's lazy ass isn't doing anything. So, speaking of lazy asses not doing anything, let's talk about the sermon this week. So, we have, really, season 4 has been a winding road, but we have wound our way to the end of that road. And now it's time to ask the big question, right? The question, the only one that matters: how does it all work? How could it possibly work? How can there be a God in heaven who loves us and supposedly cares about us all and still allows the world as we know it to exist? That's the question that has plagued man since, honestly, before Christianity. That's what we're going to talk about, which I think is so interesting today, is even before there was the one true God, there were people saying that shit doesn't make sense. And yet we went ahead and did it anyway, which I find fascinating. That even, we already knew that this whole idea of a one true God, or that, didn't make sense. And yet hundreds of years later, we still ran with it and tried to make it make sense. And look how that's worked out for us. I mean, the paradise that we live in now is indicative of how successful that has been. So, 3 cheers for those idiots who came up with that, because it's clearly worked out so well. So, of course, what I'm talking about is the problem of evil, right? If God is all-knowing, all-powerful, if God is really God, how could he justify the existence of evil? How do you wrap your head around that? And as I stated, mankind has sort of been trying to figure out the answer to that question even before Christianity was a thing. And I don't know that Christianity has ever come up with a good answer to it. They've come up with some answers to it. We're going to talk about them today. And we're going to talk about how not good any of them actually are, and how really insulting they are, which should tell you everything you need to know about Christianity. It's been posed with one great question, one real thing that, a true hurdle. If you could get over all the other crazy shit, this is the one logic problem that it still needs to explain, and it's never been able to address it. It doesn't even come close. In fact, some of the ways it addresses it are more vexing than the question itself, I find. So, with that in mind, let's dive in, shall we, to this week's episode, The Odyssey of Theodicy. Because it really is an odyssey, this whole thing. We shall. So, in the beginning, the gods look like the Super Friends, right? That's just how it worked. Early religion didn't need theodicy. It was unnecessary. Why? Because the pantheon of gods allowed for evil to be assigned to malevolent gods or discord among the gods. Get those arms just ripped. I mean, look, even Dionysus there is eyeing him up like, look at dude's beefy arms. And basically, yeah, you didn't have a problem of evil because you didn't have one god, that ruled over everything. Instead, you had a collection of them. And you didn't have, the idea that one god was in complete control. Instead, they were constantly battling against each other. They were constantly jockeying for position. If you did something that ingratiated yourself to one god, you might irritate another god. And so, whenever something bad happened or something disadvantageous happened, it was very easy to assign that guilt to someone. There was no problem of evil. Evil existed because the gods weren't perfect. They were basically super-powered manifestations of humanity. And just as much as it's really easy to just accept that there's just shitty people in the world, well, they're just being super fiends instead of super friends, as Kurt pointed out, right? It's really easy to wrap your head around. And so there was no need to explain it. Why would you need to worry about where evil came from? Evil was that god over there who didn't like you because you liked this god, and those two gods were opposed to each other. You didn't have to do anything wrong even to earn his ire. So, yeah, it's easy to make it all work out. Then, around in the 6th century, 6th century BCE, mind you, Zoroastrianism, it hits the playing field, and it reimagines everything. Ahura Mazda and his nemesis Ahriman provide an explanation for evil as they represent duality and balance. You have Ahura Mazda. He's pure good. Everything that good flows from him. He's not totally all-powerful, though. He is the most powerful being in existence, but he's not, the only one. Ahriman has equal power, and they oppose against each other. One tries to lead men into darkness, one tries to lead men into light. They constantly battle each other with equal amounts of power, trying to lead mankind one way or the other. So again, you still don't have a problem with the idea of evil because, again, it's balanced. There has to be good, there has to be evil. And you're not saying, that Ahura Mazda created everything. He didn't create evil. Evil's always existed just like he has always existed. So again, there's no real conflict there. There's no need to explain anything. There's no remainder that needs accounted for. It all adds up. They're primordial forces. You have to have good and you have to have evil. Nobody created evil. Nobody decided to allow evil to exist. It exists because it did. So it still made sense there. Towards the end of the Persian regime and into the early part of Alexander, this concept called divine providence really started to take off. And it was a philosophy that evolved along with religion, and it was the idea that God upheld the natural orders of things, and he chose to bless some while cursing others. Well, not long after that kind of really entered the public consciousness, a lot of logicians and philosophers and just men of learning begin to challenge that idea and say, really? The world exists by some grand plan and the gods have it all accounted for? And that they already know what's going to happen and that everything's already planned out, that everything's already been determined. Philosophers had a real problem with this idea of a deterministic universe where everything had already, that basically everything was a cosmic chain reaction. He's got the best spreadsheets. He got pivot tables for days. But yeah, the idea that God has already figured all this out and it's all been set in motion. Think of, a chemical reaction. And once it happens, you watch it's, a domino effect. This happens and this happens and this happens. And there was some idea that that's what the universe was according to God's plan. That God had figured all this out, he had planned it out, and he had set the wheels in motion. And what appeared to be free will to us was already determined because of the idea that God knew everything and knew what was going to happen. And a lot of the Greek philosophers around the 3rd century BCE pushed back at this and said, that doesn't make sense. How could he already have it all figured out? How could everything already be planned and yet free will exist? And again, they weren't thinking of one specific god. The Greeks did not believe in the idea of, Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. But even with their own pantheon of gods, the idea that they already knew what was going to happen, that it was all planned, no, it didn't make sense. Yeah, the Greeks, from the get-go, we're talking 300 years before the birth of Christ, a very famous Greek philosopher called shenanigans right off the bat. We're, of course, talking about one of Riff's all-time favorite people ever to exist. Top 10 humans for me with this dude. Epicurus. Epicurus, like I said, 300 BCE. This guy called shenanigans on the whole system. He lived from 341 to about 270 BCE. He was an empiricist who was later slandered by Christians as a debaucherous patron of drunks and whores. I seriously can't explain how awesome I think this guy is. Now, what is an empiricist? In case you don't know, that is someone who believes that only your senses can give any insight into the natural world. If you can't touch it, taste it, smell it, feel it, or hear it, if you can't, if you can't see it, if those things don't add up, then it isn't real or it has no value. And his was the idea. Epicurus lived by the model that if something feels good, it's because it is good. And if something feels bad, it's because it is bad. Things that make you feel good must be good. Things that make you feel bad must be bad. He taught that sex must obviously be good because of how it feels. And something that feels that good has to be a good thing. So that we should not feel shame in sex. Just, consensual sexual encounters, there was nothing to be ashamed about with those, because the reason they felt good is because it is good. And he lived by that mindset, that drinking, if getting drunk was fun because you felt good. Yet he cautioned against overindulgence, as he believed that the hangover was proof that if you drank too much, it was not good. Because why? You didn't feel good the next day. Sometimes love didn't feel like it should. I guess, Epicurus always had that was his thing, was that he accepted very early on. He wrote about sadomasochism, and that what felt like pleasure to one could feel like pain to another.
You guys want a beer commercial? You tell them, Ray.
And that, what felt good to one might not feel good to another. And so perception was indeed reality to this guy. But again, if it felt good, it was good. And he taught that sex wasn't a bad thing, drinking wasn't a bad thing, enjoying yourself was not a bad thing. But yet he did believe that, when you overindulged and you didn't feel good, then Yes, he didn't. He believed that truth was in the experience, and so my truth would be different than your truth, but that we should go out and seek truth, and that to him the best life lived would be a life spreading pleasure to others while also experiencing as much pleasure as you could while still being a moral person. To him, being a moral person meant going out and spreading as much good feeling as possible, making others feel good. And while experiencing as much of that as you possibly can yourself, that was a life well lived. Christianity, few hundred years later, would slander this man as being a pervert who was only into debauchery and self-indulgence, which completely misses the point of what he was saying, because, well, you're not really Christianing if you're not missing the point, I suppose. He spoke of an infinite universe and knew of the existence of atoms. We're talking about 300 years before the birth of Christ. This guy said, the universe is infinite, and oh, by the way, everything is composed of these tiny things we call atoms. We see atoms terrified the early philosophers. The idea of atoms existing was pure nightmare fuel for the early philosophers, because they believed, they kind of went back to what I was saying before about the chain reaction thing. They believed that then, if atoms do really exist and they're governed by laws just like everything else, then everything was basically a really long domino effect. And how could you have free will? Because everything was a reaction to something else. So every action is a reaction to a previous action. So all those actions that happened long before you came into existence influence you to do what you're doing, and there's nothing you can do about it. And this was a big, scary thing for philosophers, because it made the idea of free will seem sketchy. Epicurus was on this case. He came up with the concept of the atomic swerve, which is as dope as it sounds. That is the idea that despite forces dictating that an atom should do something, it is possible for that atom to occasionally do something else, and to react differently than observation says it should. To him, that was the easy workaround to free will. Was that, sure, the math says that it should do this, but sometimes it just doesn't do that. That's called an atomic swerve, and he built it. While it doesn't sound very scientific, it helped them latch on to the understanding that just because sometimes shit doesn't work. Yes, that is literally his scientific theory. Sometimes 1 + 1 doesn't actually equal 2, which you will find is basically how Theodicy works. It's funny that he created the whole idea of Theodicy by questioning something that he was basically doing a logic question, and when he did that, he created the idea of Theodicy before it, hundreds of years before it really needed to exist. Yet he also, through his idea of the atomic swerve, had created the first Theodicy. That, yeah, sometimes shit just doesn't add up. You go with it. So I think it's kind of funny that he asked and answered his own question hundreds of years before it was necessary to ask and answer that question. And then he got slandered as a pervert because Christians don't like to have any fun. His big question that he asked, and this is paraphrased, we don't have any of his exact works. We have people who talked about having read his works. Library of Alexandria, that whole thing. If God wishes to remove evil and cannot, he is impotent. If he is able but unwilling, he is malevolent. If he is both willing and able, then why not? I mean, yeah, Jesus, he loved to just hang out. So every Friday night, right? Although he'd always then, he'd disappear for a couple days, but man, could he rally. But yeah, that's your question right there. If God wishes to remove evil and he can't, well then he's not all powerful, is he? He can't get it up. If he is able, but he just decides not to, well, that seems like a real dick move. And if he's both willing and able, well, then why doesn't he do it? If God has the power to get rid of evil, and he wants to get rid of evil, well, then why doesn't he get rid of evil? Pretty valid criticism. This blew the doors off of everything. He asked this in 300, and it was more really of a thought question then. It was, again, he was attacking divine providence, and I feel like that's important to take just a second and look at, was the fact that he was not questioning a one god system. He came from a multi-god system. And even though the word atheist comes from the Greek and it means not of God, nobody would have been an atheist in that time. You wouldn't have lasted long. An atheist back then was a slanderous thing to say about someone. You were saying, oh, he's not of God, basically meaning no God wants anything to do with you. You don't have a God because you've been rejected by the gods. That is what that word would have meant back then. And Epicurus, we have no reason to believe that he didn't believe in Zeus and the whole crew up there. What he was saying was that they couldn't have it all figured out. There's no way that they possibly had everything figured out, and that no God could, because he did not live in a utopian paradise, and any God that could be all powerful and be all knowing and be a good God would have to get rid of evil. So he was basically saying that he knew that his version of the gods made sense, because the idea of a one true God couldn't possibly hold water, because how could evil exist then? So he was basically calling out a system that didn't even exist yet as being stupid. And of course, 300 years later, we caught up and said, hey, what you said makes sense. Fuck you, we're not going to believe that. We're going to believe the exact thing you said was stupid. So, good on Epicurus for solving a problem 300 years before we had it. Bad on us for not listening to what he said and still falling for the problem. So, now, let's get back to where we were. And let's take a look at this, okay? Let's get a little deeper. There are two real ways to look at this question of evil. There's the logical way and the evidentiary way. Let's look at the logical way first. The logical way says God is the all-powerful creator of all that exists. I don't think anybody would dispute that that is the biblical interpretation of who God is, right? The all-powerful creator of all that exists. I think after 4 seasons together, we've at least knocked out that that's what Christians claim their God is. Pure evil does exist. We don't have to go into it. I mean, the Holocaust happened. Child molestation happens. Rape happens. All of those things happen. You can't, really explain away too much of it as, oh, well, it's only bad from a perspective kind of view. No, there's things that are just bad. This isn't it was good for him and bad for you. No, these are just bad. If God allows that, then he would have, and he is all-powerful. He created everything. Then he would have to be complicit in the existence of evil. And Christians really don't like it when you phrase it that way. They really don't like it. They try their best to just explain it away, right? Well, and then there's the evidential way. This way is a little harsher, which is probably why I like it even better. It states, pure evil exists. Everyone knows that. If you wanted to try to argue with me that pure evil doesn't exist, you'll lose. You're a moron. An indifferent God is more plausible than the Christian God, as a loving, omniscient, and all-powerful being would prevent all the suffering it could. Again, there's nothing radical in that statement. So not addressing the is there a God or not, just is the Christian God more plausible than a God of total indifference to the human condition? Well, the fact that the world exists the way it does would suggest that no Christian God exists. You can't use this to say no higher power exists, but you can say that the higher power as ascribed to Christianity, the higher power that knows all, sees all, is everywhere, and is all powerful, he couldn't possibly exist. How? Because why would evil exist? We suffer because sin. All right, let's dance with that, shall we? Let's dance with that. What is sin? Sin is the violation of God's commandments, supposedly. Well, which one of God's commandments gets broken when a lightning bolt strikes a tree and it falls on your house and kills your kid? Which commandment did you break there? You didn't break any, right? That's just natural evil, as some in the Theodicy community would say. That, there's just bad things that happen. Well, why? Why do there have to be bad things that happen? That doesn't explain anything. And the idea of sin is a cop-out, that God created this perfect world, but sin ruined it. That's like saying, I made this perfect thing, it just can't get wet, but also it has to live outside and I live in Miami. The idea that it can't get wet, but yet it has to live outside in Miami would assure that it is going to get wet, so it's going to get ruined. And if you had any foresight at all, you would be able to see that coming. Much like if this God was supposedly all-knowing, he would have known that all this evil was going to happen by the way that he designed things. So if he then went ahead and designed them that way anyway, that means that he's indifferent to the suffering that happens. So the whole we suffer because of sin really holds no water, because the omniscient God would have foreseen sin and chose to let it happen anyway, because he didn't actually care a lick about the suffering of mankind. That doesn't really seem like an all-loving, all-powerful God. But that's the shit they're shoveling. So let's move on with them, shall we? There are three major kinds of theodicies. The first kind is called a refutation. It claims that there really is no problem, and essentially that evil exists because it has to, and that trying to understand the why of evil exists is pointless. So when people create refutation-based theodicies, they're basically saying, look, I can't explain why. They're not looking for a moral justification for the existence of evil. They just kind of throw their hands up and give you it has to. You can't have good without bad. You can't have hot without cold. You can't have up without down. You can't have good without evil. You just have to. And they don't attempt to explain it any further than that. But Riff, that sounds like a cop-out. It is. Then there are defenses. These merely focus on proving that it is plausible that God could exist in a world with evil. Again, they do not seek a moral or logical explanation. These theodicies basically try to say that that just because there's evil doesn't invalidate the existence of God, that there is some kind of loophole that could allow evil to manifest without God being complicit in it, so that God is off the hook, but yet it doesn't have to add up. It just has to, there could be some way. Basically, they don't resolve the fact that God could prevent evil. They just resolve the fact that evil could exist without God having allowed it, or at least have his sticky fingers all over it. That God didn't create evil. He tolerates it, but it's not his fault. That would be the defense version. And then there are true theodicies. These are the real pieces of work. These are people that seek to provide a moral justification for the existence of evil in a world governed by a just and loving God. A true Theodicy looks at the world around us and goes, yep, this is fine. God wants it to be this way, and no, that's not fucked up. Those people that come up with true Theodicies are fucking nuts. So I think we should look at like the 6 most popular. What do you think? Do you think we should look at like the 6 most popular and see if we can keep from spewing our dinner all over the internet? Because these are bad. These aren't good. And remember that these aren't mine. I didn't make these up. So let's look at the 6 most popular. You like that it's the number 6? 6 is the perfect number. Ooh, banana chocolate shake. Sounds delightful. Love banana chocolate shake. Alright, so they fall into a couple categories. Before we get to the 6, let's look at the big umbrella categories. You're getting an education today on this. I hope you're enjoying this. The necessary evil idea. That the natural world is a complex system designed to move forward and evolve. Sometimes these changes must be violent or evil. The idea that, the Earth is like a combustion motor. And when you build a combustion motor, the idea is that it drives your car forward, right? But what does it also do? Well, when the fuel ignites, there's an explosion that moves pistons. Well, what else is created? Heat is created. The engine gets hot. Now you have to have coolant to cool it down. Like, heat is not the purpose of the engine. The heat is not the desire of the engine, but the engine does create heat. It's a byproduct. It has to be there. The engine shakes. You have to insulate it. You're not attempting to create something that shakes. That wasn't your goal, but it's a byproduct that you deal with. That's kind of the idea here with necessary evil, that the Earth is an engine that runs, and hey, the engine sometimes produces secondary effects like, child rape and genocide. I'd say you built a shitty engine and you should build a new engine. What do I know? Theophrastus, he was a Greek philosopher after the time of Epicurus. Not much, though. And he stated that if you seek a binary moral worldview, if you need a world that breaks down into good versus evil, then the existence of one absolutely demands the existence of the other. That you just can't have a good versus evil worldview without good and evil. And to an extent, he's got a point there. That if you want to divide things neatly into 2 camps, then you need 2 camps. You can't divide things neatly into 1 camp. That would be insane. There's the absence of good school of thought. What does that say? That all things that exist are good. Evil is a state of non-existence. It exists only where good does not. All that God has created is good. We create evil by our actions that destroy or cancel out the good that is in existence. Can we divide it into 0 camps? Well, it wouldn't be dividing, right? There would be no camps. There's no division. So this one, the absence of good, is that God created everything and it was perfect. And then we fucked it up. And everything that we do continues to create all the bad. This is kind of the sin idea, falls into this one. That God didn't create evil. God created perfection. We tainted that perfection. We perverted that perfection. And now there is evil in the world. It still, though, doesn't address God allowing that to happen or God not intervening and rectifying the situation. That is not addressed by the absence of good. I want to make that very clear. Or you can use moral relativism and rationalize it. This leans heavily on the idea that good and evil are defined by reason. And as we cannot understand the reasoning of a higher being, we can't expect to understand why evil simply must exist.
It's a big dog and it's taking a fat dump.
The idea with moral rationalism is it's basically that there's a reason you're just too human to understand it. This one is really popular with the faith crowd. That you just have to have faith that God knows what he's doing. Sure, the world does look pretty shitty. How do you explain the big dog and the fat dump? Well, because the existence of the big dog implies the existence of a fat dump, right? I think that the one implies the existence of another. How could a good and loving God allow a fat dump to exist and not the dog to create that fat dump? Doesn't seem to add up. So these kind of three schools of thought really create the six kind of theodicies that we're going to address for our remaining time here today. And we're just going to take a real high level look at these and then laugh at them because they're dumb. So come with me. This is about to be a journey, kids. These are the most common theodicies that you will encounter thrown at you. And I want to take a second here. Let's take a beat. Your average Christian will not be able to hit you with this because defending their faith is not something they're generally all that good at. And so these theodicies that I'm giving you, you would likely have to be talking to a pastor, somebody who is very deep in their faith, or like a real shithead, to have them throw these at you. But you will be prepared should you encounter a well-read shithead. Because your average Christian doesn't bother messing with any of this. We'll get one of these theodicies is kind of, I feel like today, the product of the the product of the modern Christian and their way of trying to rationalize these questions of evil. So the first one, they're all different models. We're going to talk about the free will model. There's two versions of the free will model. The first is the libertarian version, which is kind of hilarious, given that I think just about everybody here knows exactly how I feel about libertarians. But the libertarian model of the free will idea is that God restricts his power in order to make free will possible. That God could absolutely, no doubt, without a doubt, make a perfect world. God could totally eradicate evil tomorrow. We could live in a utopia at a snap of his big God fingers. But instead, God wants you to smell his fingers and smell what he's cooking, and that what he's cooking up is free will. You make a bed, you lie in it. He could interfere. But God puts restrictions on his powers like no libertarian would ever do. And God says, you do your thing. I'm going to let it all play out. I'm not getting involved. Then there's the compatibilist model, which states that God's plan runs in sync with human free will. These are the people that they get around the God allows evil to exist by saying, well, God's already worked it all out, and it's all going to work together in the end for the greater good. You can't understand God's plan, but God's already figured it all out. So he already knew what you were going to do. And even though you didn't make the right choice, it's all going to balance in the end because God set things in motion to make it all be okay. Let us now destroy this model of stupidity with one simple thought. These motherfuckers pray. I guarantee you, if either a compatibilist or a libertarian had a child who got cancer, they would pray to God to cure that child of cancer. But yet, that would invalidate their whole model here, because their whole model states that God doesn't get involved. God doesn't interfere. And they have a real tough time explaining why, they prayed for God to get involved, and sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. And then they go back to the whole, oh, well, you just can't understand God's plan. It's a cop-out. This is not a satisfying theodicy because it doesn't do shit. This is a way for simple people to convince themselves that, God cares. Yes, exactly. You have to have a processing ability of a child for you to think that this makes sense. So this one is stupid. We've given it the big fucking space dragon, fuck you. Torch this model. We're moving on. There is the soul-making model. Humans are in need of growth, and much of that comes from facing adversity. Sacrifice, compassion, determination, all are virtues that require an oppositional force. God simply allows these things to improve us. Free will is still the backbone of this model. Think of the Job story here. That God knows Job is good, but Satan doesn't buy it. So God allows Satan to take a big steaming dump on Job's head in the idea that all of this will prove that Job loves God and that he loves God for the right reasons, not because God's been good to him. And Job goes through all this adversity, but still comes out the other side loving God, and God blesses him doubly. Now, what is never explained in that story by Christians is how that still makes it all okay, because the first thing Satan does is kill Job's children. And it's not stated in the end of the book that God reanimates the dead children. No, he just gives God double the amount of children he had. Those children are still dead as fuck, though, and were murdered for no reason other than God was playing dice games with his buddy Satan and wanted to see if this guy would really hold out. That right there completely invalidates this kind of idea. Not to mention, the soul-making model has a severe flaw. So it's claimed that, God created our soul, but we need to go through this hardening and we need to go through this hardening and this shaping by adversity. So, well, why couldn't God have created our souls so that what shapes us is just love and bliss? Why couldn't God have, if he's an all-powerful, all-knowing God, he could have created our souls so that fucking ejaculating is what makes us into better people. And so if we just came all day long in a land of bliss and sex, that we would then achieve higher status. He could absolutely do that. He chose not to. He chose, by this idea, you would be saying that God has decided that you need a crucible of pain and suffering to evolve as a person. Again, that just seems like a dick move. It's just a dick move. So it's a stupid model.
Praise hell and praise
it
Dale.
Can kiss my ass. We are sending this model to the fire heap. No one's listening to this shit. The possible worlds model. Anybody see the Doctor Strange movie? God designed a world where all things work together for the greater good. But that isn't always perceptible to humanity. All outcomes are possible within this framework so that free will is unharmed. These folks basically... this one is basically the multiverse. I haven't seen it yet either, so any spoilers that I throw out here are me pulling shit out of my ass, so that'll just blame the space dragon. Basically, think of it as, if you remember in the end of, I believe it was Endgame, Doctor Strange told Iron Man that he had looked at, 1 million or however many versions of this moment in time, and only one of them had a positive outcome. That is the idea here with the possible worlds model, is that God has created a world in which any outcome is possible. The total multiverse applies. What outcome happens based on our decisions. And God knows what will happen because he knows all the possibilities. But it doesn't become manifest and real until we actually do it. So God couldn't prevent the evil because the evil wouldn't happen until we did it. The evil wouldn't exist until it exists. So God couldn't prevent it from existing because he only knows that it could exist if we do the wrong thing. He also knows that there's a possibility for us to do the right thing, which will manifest more goodness in the world. And so this one is kind of like, I don't know if anybody's ever seen, there's a great idea with Die Hard, the bullet time theory, that every bullet that's fired at John McClane could hit him or could not. And what you're seeing is basically a spider-webbed universe of all the times that every shot misses him, at least fatally. And that's what reality is that every time you're faced with a decision, reality branches off in all the different ways of that decision, and God is allowing that to happen. He's not forcing us down a pathway because he's given us free will. And so this one is the closest that I would say makes any logical sense. The idea that, but it also technically would remove God's power of omniscience. Because if God only knows all the possibilities, but he doesn't know which one you're going to pick until you pick it, he couldn't possibly be omniscient. If he doesn't know which one you're going to pick, he just knows what'll happen depending on which one you pick. That's not the same thing. That is distinctively not the same thing. But this one at least tries, right? It at least tries, and it's also based on like a comic book philosophy, so they get points for trying, right? Next, the eschatological hope model. God allows evil to exist only until his return, when he will purify the world and evil will be destroyed. Purification and rewards to the faithful are only possible if there is evil for at least a time. These folks say that yes, there is evil in the world and God is allowing it to happen. But in the grand scale of all of eternity, this period of time that he allows evil to happen is very short. And that the evil needs to happen so that he can come back and punish the evil and purify us and reward the people who were good while they had the option to be evil. Voltaire is one of my favorite authors, and he would have kind of leaned into this camp with the idea that things like greed or, things like that could be motivators for good, but that an overabundance of them would be bad. But that, yes, if you're too greedy, it leads to evil. But if you just want more, that leads to determination and motivation. And so it's the extremes that are bad, not the initial thing. And that God allows those things to exist because the overall thing that they do is good, weighed against the bad, coupled with the fact that God is only going to allow them to exist for a short period of time versus he will come back and make a perfect world that will last for all of eternity. But in order to find out who's worthy of that perfect world, you have to give them the opportunity to be evil first. Because only through having the opportunity to be evil could you truly find out who is good. Again, this one at least tries. It's still dumb. Because why do you need to reward the faithful? Why couldn't just everybody be the faithful? Why couldn't you have a utopia? Again, this is rooted in humanity's need to other people and need to have somebody has to be the bad guy. You can't just have all good guys in a story. Humans don't like that. You got to have bad guys. And how do you have bad guys? You have free will, and you say those people are bad because they want to be. They're bad because they're bad people. But I am a good person because I don't do the bad things even though I could. It's such a myopic worldview, and it's just so fucking silly. Moving on. This today, right here, really, really bad. The protest model. This, to me, is where we joked about him earlier. The youth pester guy, The guy that tells you he knows about a pretty groovy dude with long hair who didn't always do what people told him. His name was Jesus, and he says that while sitting on a backwards chair, wearing clothes that were probably cool 3 years ago, the last time that he was, right before he went to Bible's, college. And now he's married to a 22-year-old girl that's got a whole lot of sexual repression and daddy issues and will eventually hate him and seek comfort in the arms of strange women. But that's further down the line. But I feel like, youth pastor Jonathan, that dickhole, he's really into the protest model. The protest model is the pussy's version of Theodicy. This is Theodicy for little bitches. It's such a cop-out, it infuriates me to even discuss. Humanity speaks from the wounded position and exclaims to God that from our perspective, an intervention was warranted. He totally should have stepped in when all the evil, was eviling. Then, the believer waits for an answer secure in the faith that God will answer, and all will be made clear in the end. These are the guys that when you tell them, how can you believe in God in a world where so much evil exists, that they look at you and go, yeah, man, there is a lot of evil in the world. And it really does make me mad. And I just wish God would come down and make it all go away. But I think what we have to do every day is pray and ask God to make it all go away. And one day He will. And He'll come back, and then He'll explain to us why it ever had to exist in the first place. What? The ultimate cop-out, dude. The ultimate cop-out. It is so non-confrontationally granola bullshit that, you're right. God totally should have stepped in. But man, who am I to understand it? We just got to know that He's going to step in eventually, and then He'll explain to us why He didn't step in. This is the total, I have seen this model be embraced by the Hillsong church style a lot. The people who their idea of a praise service is just mouthing some ambiguous praise to God over and over and over again while a retard leans on the keyboards. It's just, somebody just sleeps on the keyboards there, and you get the organ, and then some idiot that wants to be Dave Matthews with 3 capos on his guitar neck just strums and closes his eyes and swirls his perfectly coiffed Abercrombie haircut. You know exactly who I'm fucking talking about. God, I hate praise bands. But this is their model through and through. Yeah, crash into Jesus, baby. Yeah, the protest model. The you're totally right to be angry at God. And, let's just totally cop out on this here. Oh, I can't stand it. And then there's a sapiential model. This one is so high-minded that it definitely farts into glasses and sniffs it. There's just no other way around that. We cannot understand why evil exists. Confronting that problem helps us come to the understanding that we cannot understand everything. This should lead us to a more awe-inspiring view of God. Take a minute, drink that in. I swear it makes sense in how much it doesn't make sense. That the fact that this doesn't add up, that it doesn't make sense, that we should take comfort in that, because that just proves that how wonderful God is. That He made this system that we can't make sense of. And the idea that it not making sense and it not adding up, that is what you need. That's the journey, is understanding that it doesn't add up and that it doesn't make sense. And that by understanding that journey and understanding that it doesn't add up and that it doesn't make sense, that you will somehow achieve happiness and you will be able to understand the world around you better, because you just have to accept that you can't understand it. That, you know, but understanding that you don't understand is some kind of enlightened moment. It's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. It's fucking nonsense. So those are the 6 of the most common forms of theodicy. And just about anybody who attempts to explain away God's bad behavior or lack of involvement in our lives will reference one of those. So now you're prepared. You can hit them with it. So I think I want to close with the theodicy of the big fucking space dragon. How do I resolve the existence of the big fucking space dragon with the existence of evil? I'll tell you how. The big fucking space dragon is not omnipotent.
My time's an end.
Yes, your dumb is a completely viable counter because they have to know it's dumb. But the big fucking space dragon's theodicy goes like this. We've never maintained once that he is all-powerful or all-knowing. He is powerful and he knows things. Oh, you should hit them with the 3D. Whenever someone tells you, I can explain why God exists in a world filled with evil, you look at your friends and you go, Devo, get the table. But the idea with the big fucking space dragon is that, you know, he exists, but he is not all-powerful. He is just powerful. Curtis putting the smackdown on him here. He exists, but his existence is not a reason to give up on anything else. His existence does not mean we should not be concerned with other things. Instead, his existence should remind us that we are the agents of change, and that the big fucking space dragon does not exist to figure our shit out for us. The big fucking space dragon exists as a cudgel to remind us to figure shit out ourselves. And the big fucking space dragon helps when he can, but what he does more is inspires us to help each other. And the big fucking space dragon can't be everywhere at every time, but his people can. And so when you see someone in need, when you see someone who needs help, when you see someone who is wrestling with evil, who is being confronted with evil, you be the big fucking space dragon. You be the answer to their problems. You step in and through the flame of knowledge, burn away their ignorance and help them get through whatever situation it is that they're encountering. That is how we will prove that the big fucking space dragon exists in a world full of evil, is because how could we, the disciples of the big fucking space dragon, seek to battle evil if evil does not exist? It's not the big fucking space dragon's problem that there's evil in the world. That was his dad, L. Big fucking space dragon's just here to help us navigate it and to burn the unbelievers with the holy fire of knowledge. I hope you have enjoyed this season. I hope you've learned a little. I hope you've had some fun. And I hope you are ready to punch the next nonsensical dickhead who tells you that God exists and that evil's just a thing we have to put up with. You punch that guy right in the nose. Because we're not buying your bullshit. There is no God. If he is, he's asleep at the wheel. So either way, we've got to take things into our own hands and be the space dragon that we want to see in the world. So thanks everybody for being here. I love you all dearly. I hope you have a good rest of your Monday evening. We will be taking a little bit of time off to get ready for another season. There will be some polls coming out in the Discord. In the meantime, we will play some cricket and we will do some other nonsensical things on this channel. Don't go away. We're not going away. We're just gonna take a little time. Yes, a sabbatical of sorts. But we will be back with another season, and I should play some Hades. If you want to see me get frustrated, that could definitely happen, because I would certainly get frustrated. But yeah, we'll have some cricket, we'll have some other things, and we're also going to be starting. We're not going to stream it the first night, but coming soon on Thursday nights, I will be hosting video game nights at a local watering hole, and we may stream some of the shenanigans that come out of that. So, thank you all for being here. I hope you now understand that Christians have no idea why there's evil in the world. They have no answer for why there's evil in the world. They don't like it. That's why they made up a devil. But we, of course, know that the devil isn't real. We're the devil. If anybody was the devil, it's us. We've undone it all. But we're just being ourselves, who are made in God's nature. So really, it's all his fault in the end. Thanks for being here, everybody. Happy Monday. And go be the space dragon that someone else needs you to be. Thanks a lot.